Come join me as we paint these pine cones step by step. I did these pine cones a few years ago and I thought it would be fun to recreate them as a tutorial to share with you. Here's my reference photo. It's not the best, it's a little bit pale, but it gives me the idea of the shape of the pine cones. Here's my line drawing that you can download for free and use it to trace onto your watercolor paper like I did here. And it's one of those things where you can retrace and practice over and over if you need to. We're going to use some burnt sienna, some raw sienna, some Moonglow, and if you don't have Moonglow, we can use Indigo, and I'll show you how we'll use both of those. I'll show you how to use an X-Acto knife to add some highlights in the end, and I'll show you a couple different ways we can use our waterproof Micron pen. So let's get started. On this first pine cone, I'm just going to do my pen work ahead of time. I'm kind of tracing my pencil lines, just kind of skipping around. I'm not outlining every single line, I'm just kind of getting that idea of the pine cone. On our pine cone on the left, we'll do our pen work at the end. Just kind of wanted to show you two different ways that we could use our pen. I have kind of a light touch here. I don't want to press down too much. It's just kind of getting that idea of the pine cone with the pen. I really love adding pen into my watercolors. I love to draw, so it's kind of a way I get to do two things that I really love. I get to draw, I get to do watercolor. And if this part really makes you uncomfortable, you don't have to use pen, but you'll kind of see in the end where it just kind of helps us with our detail, and it kind of helps us keep track of where our colors are going. Now we're going to start with our big pine cone. We're just going to get the whole entire thing wet from outside to inside. Just getting a good layer of water in there because we want to do a wet on wet technique in the beginning for our first layer, and this really helps for our color to spread. I'm going to take some of my raw sienna. I'm just going to fill that pine cone in. Kind of let the color move in the pine cone. This doesn't need to be perfect. We're just kind of getting that base layer in. And it's gonna dry a lot lighter than this. It's looking pretty vibrant right now. Just kind of fine-tuning those edges. I'm taking some of my burnt sienna, and I'm just going to kind of tap it in there. Just let it kind of move on the page. Those colors just kind of blend on the page together. Instead of mixing it on the palette, we mix it on the page, and it will help give us that pine cone texture. Just tapping in a little more of that raw sienna in a little higher concentration. I'm going to take my hair dryer and get that first layer dry so we can keep working. Now that our first layer is dried, you can really see how the color is shifted and how creating layers is going to build up this vibrancy. Right now we're going to start working on kind of the shadowy, darker areas in the middle. And I kind of want to pre-wet those areas again because I enjoy doing a wet on wet technique that when I drop my color in, it will kind of move on the page and it won't look so uniform. Some areas will be lighter and some areas will be darker. And how I achieve that is by wetting the areas that I want to work on next. I'm kind of looking at my reference photo right now, just kind of looking at where my shadows are. Once you kind of get started on the pine cone, it's easy to kind of lose track of where the highlights are and where the shadows are. So I'm just kind of working slowly, looking at my reference photo. And I'm also not copying my reference photo exactly. It was just to give me an idea of what the pine cone looked like. I'm going to make my colors way more vibrant than the inspiration photo is. And now I'm just going to add in some of my burnt sienna. And looking how vibrant that is right now, and even that won't stay as vibrant as that, but we're just gonna add that color in. I just love watching it spread in that water. It's hard for me to describe the feeling that gives me, but it's just pure enjoyment. Now I'm going to take a little bit of my indigo and I'm just going to tap it in there. I'm just going to let that shadow kind of spread into that burnt sienna. I just want a lot of variation within that shadow. It'll kind of give the appearance of detail without it actually being detail. Now we're going to go in and work on some of that shadow down at the base, just kind of working in smaller sections here so I can kind of keep track of what I'm doing. Just using the tip of my brush to just kind of add little bits of detail. And as our color kind of soaks into the page, I'll just kind of continue tapping some of my shadow color, my blue indigo, to kind of make some areas darker. And really I just kind of do that as I see fit. There's no rule in that. It's just that I have a few little areas that I want to stay a little bit darker. And even these colors are going to lighten so much that it won't look quite so dark and scary after this second layer is dried. So as you're working with your pine cone, you just kind of feel your way through. We're not making it look realistic. We're not copying our reference photo exactly. So there's just a little freedom in there and just kind of creating your pine cone the way that you would like. And I'm just kind of looking at my reference photo and just kind of figuring it out as I go. And when I got finished with this pine cone and started working on the second one, I realized how structured and I don't know, I looked at my reference photo too much and I worked on it a little too long, and I kind of wanted it to be a little more free-flowing. But as I'm warming up, sometimes my brain is a little intense and I kind of think about it a little bit too much. But you can at least see my process here of how I'm building my color and where I'm deciding to put that color. The second pine cone ended up being way easier, but I think this first one was kind of our practice. Then the next one that you do just becomes a little easier. Even a seasoned artist can struggle in the beginning to kind of get their footing. It's just part of the process. So don't feel like if you're struggling that means you're not good. It's the beginning of a painting, and we have those moments in the beginning where we're just figuring it out and getting started and getting our rhythm. It's all part of the process. Tapping in a little more of that indigo into the center, kind of make that shadow the darkest. Now I let that second layer dry, and I'm just going to add a little more of that raw sienna into the tips of my pine cone, kind of giving a little more texture and variation there. Got a little dark, so I'm just tapping just slightly some of that color out of there, but you can see it still leaves a little bit of residue there. I mix some of my burnt sienna and some of my indigo to kind of make a darker brown, and I'm just kind of coming in here and adding in just a little bit of detail, giving that pine cone a little more definition, just in a few places, kind of in the center. You can see how each layer that we build just kind of helps continue to give that dimension of the pine cone. I'm just going to add a little more color to the tips of my pine cone, just adding in a little more detail, a little more color variation there. Now we're going to let our pine cone thoroughly dry, and I'm going to bring out my Micron pen. It's a 005, it's a very thin pen, and we're just going to add in a little bit of detail in a few places. We're not going to outline, but I'm just adding in a little bit of dimension and texture. Kind of thinking about where I want to put it. And like I said in the beginning, if you don't want to use pen, you could just take a smaller brush with your dark shadow color, and you could add in a little bit of this detail with watercolor. You don't have to use a pen. I just really enjoy this part and love using pen. And we don't want to use so much that in the end we go, oh wow, she used a lot of pen. We just want just a hint so that it just gives that pine cone more dimension, more of a 3D look. And now we're going to get started on our second pine cone. This one is going to feel a lot easier because we've already had all that practice on the first one. And we're going to do the same technique where we just pre-wet and then add in our raw sienna. This one is also going to go a lot faster. Just making sure I have enough in there. We're just doing the same process we did with our first pine cone. Just tapping in our burnt sienna. Just watching that paint mix on the page. Just going to tap out a little texture with a little paper towel. We don't want to tap very hard, but it does help give us a little bit of more interest and texture. And after that first layer is dry, we're going to go in and add our shadows. Just adding in my water for our wet on wet technique. So for this pine cone, we're going to use our Moonglow instead of our Indigo as our shadow color. I'm just going to tap it in there the way we did with the first pine cone. I love Moonglow for deepening colors and adding shadow. It's kind of a purpley gray and just gives a little more dimension and interest to colors mixing on the page. I use this color a lot in my paintings, but if you don't have it, a purple would work, an indigo would work, a mixture of the two. Like, there's so many options, but I would say to stay away from Payne's gray or black to make your colors darker. It just makes them look dull and muddy, and I think mixing colors up to create a shadow color is way more interesting than adding in blacks. Just a personal preference. After I finish those shadows, I let my pinecone dry, and then I'm going to come in with another layer of shadow, just kind of deepening some areas and giving it some definition. I'm going to mix a little bit of my raw sienna and burnt sienna to give a little more detail on the tips of my pine cone. After I let everything dry, I'm going to add in my shadow to kind of continue that 3D look. Just kind of going to wet the area that I'm going to make my shadow because I want it to just kind of blend in there softly. I'm going to be using my Moonglow for my shadow, using my bigger number 10 round brush. As the color kind of soaks in the page, I just kind of add a little bit more color here and there. Kind of softening out the edges a little bit there. I'm going to bring a little bit of that shadow color into my pine cones so that it kind of connects that shadow with our pine cones. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to take our X-Acto knife and I'm just going to kind of scrape out some highlights. I'm going to do it very gently. We don't want to gouge holes in the paper. We're just kind of scraping a little of that color off the top. And you really have to make sure that you're 100% done with the watercolor portion of your painting and even the pen part of your painting, because we're disturbing the paper and it will become a mess if you then decide to add any other layers on top of this. We're just kind of picking a few places for highlights. We don't want to get too aggressive and go overboard, so we're just going to take it a little bit at a time. It just gives our pine cones a little more dimension and texture. And there you have it, your 3D pine cones. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, that you learned something new, that you want to try something new, and that I'll see you on the next one. Happy creating, everyone!